Welcome to this forum on persuasion, storytelling, and manipulation, a forum that's made possible thanks to the support of the Gerler Faculty Fellowship and the University of Washington Department of Philosophy. My name is Colin Marshall. I'm a professor of philosophy here at the University of Washington. I am truly honored to be joined today by three distinguished experts on persuasion and its ethical dimensions. Before I introduce them, I'd like to say something about our topics: persuasion, storytelling, and manipulation. So why talk about persuasion? Well, a short answer is that millions of people are wrong about very important things, and the fate of our country and even of our species may depend on persuading them to change their minds. We simply don't have the luxury of always just agreeing to disagree. Why talk about storytelling? Well, stories shape our lives, they shape our thoughts, and one of the oldest lessons in studies of persuasion is that stories are far more effective at changing minds than abstract arguments or stacks of evidence. And last, why talk about manipulation? Well, most of us don't like being manipulated, and we often resent people who we think are manipulating us. On the other hand, though, manipulation is sometimes the most powerful tool there is for changing other people's minds. With that, I'd like to introduce our three distinguished panelists. First, Marcia Baron is the Rudy Professor of Philosophy at Indiana University. She is an ethicist and legal philosopher whose influential work on manipulation has largely set the agenda for recent philosophical discussions of the topic. David Broockman is Associate Professor of Political Science at UC Berkeley. His innovative empirical work on influence in politics and in politically charged issues has yielded multiple surprising results and has influenced the ground-level operations of various political organizations. Daryl Davis is a musician, author, actor, and race relations expert. He has received national and international attention for his success in persuading dozens of members of white supremacist groups to change their views. The subject of a recent documentary, Accidental Courtesy, Mr. Davis has offered a deeply philosophical perspective on his work, with special attention to issues of respect, relationships, and the dangers of ignorance. So, Marcia, David, Daryl, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
So I have three questions.
Happy to be here.
I have three questions for all of you, but I have no particular strong agenda, so we can let the discussion just unfold as it does. I especially encourage any stories you have, given our theme here that help shed light on our topic. I invite you to ask each other follow-ups as they occur to you, and I'll offer follow-ups here and there. So first, I'd like to start with an example of persuasive storytelling from your own experience or work. And Daryl, would you be okay starting off with this one?
Sure. Well, I don't like to say that I persuaded anybody to renounce their ideology, these white supremacists, that I deal with. But I will say that I am the impetus for them to persuade themselves to convert or renounce that ideology. And what I have learned through dealing with these people for over 40 years, that I've been working on this in between, music and things like that, is that you cannot change someone's reality. As the saying goes, one's perception is one's reality. And even if it's not real to you, they know it's real to them. And if you attempt to try to change their reality, they're going to push back, they're going to resist. So the best thing you can do is offer them a better perception or perceptions, plural. And if they resonate with one of those perceptions, then they will change their own reality, because one's perception becomes one's reality. So rather than get into the back and forth of saying, no, you're wrong, this is why you're wrong, offer them a better perception and let them arrive at that conclusion. So now for the story, I was dealing with the guy who had the largest KKK, Ku Klux Klan group in the country. And he had them in multiple states all across, the largest membership. So he and I were becoming friends. The more we talked, the more his mind was beginning to open. And had he lived for another year, he would have been out of the Klan. I would own his robe and hood. So he was murdered. And I knew him very well. I knew the murderer very well. I went to his funeral. I never met his mother and father or his three sisters, but I met them there at the funeral. They were not involved in white supremacy at all. They didn't understand why their son was involved in it. Now, he was an adult son. He was like in his 50s. But anyway, they were very pleased to meet me. You know, they'd heard about me and heard about his having a friendship with me, and they were very pleased about that. And I participated in his funeral by playing some hymns on the piano during the service and all that kind of thing. His father began calling me about every other day. You know, they live out in the Midwest. I'm over here on the East Coast. Because I was a friend of his son's. That was his only son. He had three daughters, and he just wanted to talk to me. And he would, you know, cry over the phone and let me know, you know, what did I think about his son and what was the turning point and so forth and so on. Well, one day he called me and I was sitting right here in my living room. Phone rang and it was him. And he told me that he was crying when he called. He told me that he had a gun and he was going to go and kill the person who murdered his son. Well, I knew that, you know, I couldn't let this happen. I mean, in his mind, you know, this person took his only son, took his child, and this person deserved to die for taking his son's life. And he was hell-bent on doing this. So I had to think about this for a second. You know, I wanted to persuade him not to do this, but his reality was this person took the life of my child, my only son, and does not deserve to live. That was his reality. I cannot change that. And everything he said was correct. The person did take his son's life, no question about it. All right. So I had to create a perception for him. And I knew that he was dealing emotionally, not logically. So I had to appeal to his emotions. You know, logically, you know, you would say, hey, look, don't do that because you'll get arrested, you'll go to jail. You know, so that a logical persuasion is not going to work. You know, he didn't care about jail, he didn't care about anything but taking out that person who took away his son. So I had to appeal to his emotion, number one. Number two, I had to create a perception for him. I said, look, man, you're already old. If you do that, you're going to go to prison. And he says, I don't care. I don't care. You know, Frank is gone, blah, blah, blah. You know, that was his main focus. So I changed his perception by saying, you have three beautiful daughters. Do you want to lose them as well? You've already lost your son. He's gone. He's not coming back. They're going to lock you up, put you in prison. They're not going to put you in prison out there in Missouri. They're going to put you out in California and San Quentin or over in New York and Rikers Island to make it hard for your family to come visit you. You're not going to see your daughters. So now you've lost one son. You want to lose three more kids, all your kids? They love you. They need you. So was that manipulation? To a certain degree, yes, but it was not deceitful manipulation. Was it persuasion? Well, maybe it might be defined that way, but I was offering him a perception. He didn't care about the perception of him getting locked up and arrested and having a murder record, on a murder charge on his record or going to jail. But when I presented, you've lost one son, now you're going to lose three daughters. Can you deal with that? That perception caused him not to go out and do what he was going to do. So that's one story that I have of many.
That's a great story. David or Marcia, either of you want to follow up on this?
Well, that's a tough act to follow. That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, so you know, just to give a little bit of background on you know, some of the work that I've done. So I'm an academic, so I'm not you know, as you know, personally involved in the, you know, implementation of, you know, kind of, you know, amazing things like this. What I have been involved in together with my colleague Josh Calla at Yale is a series of studies that we've worked on in partnership with nonprofit groups, where they've, you know, reached out to people at scale, but one by one, to try to convince them to change their minds on various topics. And the two topics we've worked on the most in our work is attitudes towards transgender people and attitudes towards undocumented immigrants. This work all started with a team at the Los Angeles LGBT Center that, before we were ever involved, developed this super interesting intervention to try to convince voters who oppose same-sex marriage to support same-sex marriage. They developed this in the wake of Prop 8 in 2008 in California, which actually passed not just in California, but in LA County. They said, okay, we have some work to do in our backyard. They went out, they started just listening to voters who voted against them to understand why they did that. And based on those conversations and based on some of their experience in union organizing, they developed this approach that has now come to known as deep canvassing. And we worked on an experiment measuring the effects of their work, deploying that on attitudes towards transgender people, and now those ideas have spread to a bunch of organizations working on a bunch of issues. I think that, as I see it, the real core, and in the experiments we've done sort of clinical trials, just like clinical trials in medicine, but rather, in our case, it's clinical trials for politics, where voters are randomly assigned to different interventions, and then we measure the effects by comparing a group that gets the intervention to a group that doesn't. So we're trying to do kind of as close as we can to rigorous science to understand the effects of this. We do find effects of these. I don't want to overstate them. It's not as if canvassers are going door to door and hypnotizing people. The vast majority of people don't change their mind. I think that's part and parcel. Minds are hard to change, but we find a meaningful share too, and more to the point that change appears to be durable, which is quite rare in the study of persuasive interventions, where what you tend to find in terms of the public's reaction to a lot of persuasive interventions or political events is maybe a small initial change followed by within days a return to a pre-existing baseline. And we find that the changes from these conversations involving what I would say the two key ingredients are stories that are shared in both directions, and then non-judgmental listening is pretty meaningful change. To actually answer your question, the stories that the canvassers tell vary. We're working on a project right now with a bunch of different stories that canvassers have actually told, to try to understand because the canvassers are basically just given a prompt, which is kind of tell a story about a member of this group. So it might be tell a story about an undocumented immigrant, or a transgender person, et cetera. Tell a story about a member of that group that kind of illustrates a certain theme. And the canvassers, in practice, told stories that are very different. And so we categorized them into these different bins based on the canvassers' kind of notes of the stories they told. We've been doing work trying to understand which of those are most effective, which kinds of stories. Our preliminary results are that the most effective stories tend to be the stories that talk about and give an example of a member of that group experiencing discrimination. So, for example, you might knock on a voter's door. They might have never met a transgender person, but they might, and we kind of give them space in the conversation to express their views one way or another. We want to hear what you think, and then we'd say, well, you just said, you kind of, for example, don't think transgender people should be included in non-discrimination laws. I do think they should be included, and let me tell you, about someone I know, and how that informs my view. And so they might tell a story, for example, about a transgender friend of theirs, difficulties they went through, dealing with their family, or maybe being fired from work. They might talk about, look, here's what happened when this person was fired or unable to get a job. Here's the impacts on them. When I think about something like that happened to me, I would be angry and upset. Here's the impacts it would have on me. What do you think of that? So all the stories are true. There's nothing being made up. Those we find that those stories seem to have a pretty meaningful impact.
Great, thank you, David. And so one theme I'll notice coming across so far is an emphasis on true stories. So I think both of you so far, it sounds like there would be some reservation about offering a story to change someone's mind that was deceptive or misleading. But it looks like we've got one sort of constraint here already, which is there seems to be some presumption against using a story to mislead someone. Marcia, would you like to jump in on
Yeah,
that
actually,
point?
that's a great segue for me because I'm going to give two stories, if you don't mind. They won't take too long. And in each of them, there is an element of untruth. In the first one, it's completely made up. And the second one, it's hypothetical, but the person knows it's hypothetical. So the first story is from Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye has a daughter who is secretly betrothed to a young tailor. And she finds out that her parents have planned a different marriage for her with a wealthy older man, a butcher, who's adult children, and is not a particularly likable person. And she's deeply opposed to marrying him. Her father quickly sees that. Her father, Tevye, then starts thinking, well, what's my wife going to think about this, especially since it would have been a wealthy son-in-law for us. And he quickly decides to do the following. He screams in the middle of the night and she asks him what's wrong. And he claims to have had this apparition that the ghost of the deceased first wife of this butcher appears and threatens their daughter, okay? If she marries the man that this ghost was married to, the ghost is going to do her serious harm. So that's the apparition he reports. And he also reports that a deceased relative of theirs, the grandma who was the namesake for the daughter in question, appears to bless the marriage, but the marriage to the tailor, right? And so that's the way he handles the situation. Now, this is totally deceptive. My view, though, is that were it the case that it was the only way to bring his wife around, and he knew that, it would still be objectionable, but it would be justifiable as the lesser of two evils, because it would be better to deceive his wife in this way than to have his daughter forced into a marriage she didn't want. So that's how I would understand that one. I wanted to bring that up as totally different from what we're talking about so far. It involves a deceptive story, which makes it objectionable. But I think that, and I would definitely call it manipulative, but I would say that manipulation can be justified if it's the lesser of two evils. Now, as a matter of fact, I believe that the way it looks in Fiddler on the Roof and also with the story it's based, I don't think it was the only way. I think probably he could have reasoned with his wife, but setting that aside, supposing it had been the only way, I would say that it was manipulation that, although objectionable, is the lesser of two evils. And then I'll give another example. I just read this in a magazine. It's an ad, and it's an ad from a law firm that says, reason number 5 to set up an estate plan. Meet Elaine, your husband's next wife. In the months since your death, she has brought home-cooked meals to your husband 6 times. Each time she visits, she stays longer into the evening. She can't wait to redecorate your home, especially that hideous wallpaper you chose. She can't wait to spend your children's inheritance on more important things like jewelry, cars, cruises, and costly vacations. Do you want her to get your children's inheritance? And you may be able to see, I don't know if you can tell, but there's the picture of her. She's like all smiley and holding a martini or something and wearing an exotic hat suggesting an expensive vacation. So I thought this was perfect timing, given that we had this event coming up, because as I see it, you might call it manipulative, but it's straightforward. You know, reading it, that nobody is saying to you, I got news for you. You know, when you die, your husband already, he's going to be remarrying. It's just planting a thought that I think is a thought worth having. Are you set up in such a way that, you know, even if your husband would not now ever intend to do such a thing, he could perhaps be led by loneliness or whatever into marrying someone who would do this. And are you set up for it? So you might call that manipulative. I don't know if I even would call it manipulative, but if it is, I would say it's not really objectionable. It is playing on your emotions for sure. It's playing on fear, but it's not as far as I understand law, state law, a warrantless fear that something like that could happen. So back to the thing you were bringing up as a theme, Colin, I guess I think that deception puts the first case into a category of being clearly objectionable, but it might nonetheless be justified as the lesser of two evils. And in the second case, from this ad, I wouldn't call it deceptive, but it's also not telling a true story. It's just telling a possible story, but everybody's on board. They know that. So unlike Tevye's wife, who doesn't know that he hasn't really had this dream, me reading this, I know that they're not somehow aware of something I'm not aware of that my husband's up to.
That's great.
Could I dovetail into
please.
what Martha was saying? Yeah, I agree with both guests here, and I think with the deception thing, sometimes it can be justifiable and not even be malignant or something. Like, for example, I want to plan a surprise birthday party for you, so I tell you I'm going to take you out for dinner, the two of us, and and I take you to some place and all your friends are there, surprise, all that kind of stuff. I've deceived you, but and I've manipulated you into going with me to a supposed dinner for your birthday, but it turns out to be a surprise party. So you're not going to be furious with me. You might be a little upset that you didn't catch on earlier, but whatever. But let's, as Marcia was saying, let's do a hypothetical example for a moment. Let's say you have. Now, we all like deception to a certain degree. Like when we go to a magic show as adults, we know we're going to be deceived. The art of deception is what the magician does. And we know he cannot make an elephant disappear off the stage, even though we saw it disappear right before our very eyes. We know there's some logic behind it. We just don't know it. But we enjoy that deception, all right, from David Copperfield or whoever. So let's just say you have a 7 or 8 year old brother who goes to a magic show with his buddies. He comes home and tells you, Colin, you're not gonna believe this. This magician on stage, he asked for a female volunteer and 50 women raised their hand. He picked one out of the audience, brought her up on stage, asked her what her name was, where she's from, and then he had her climb into this long box and put her feet out the hole at that end and put her head out the hole at this end. And then he closed the lid and took a chainsaw and went right through the box, middle of the box. The chainsaw came out the bottom of the box. He cut her in half. And then he told her to wiggle her feet out the hole. And she wiggled her feet. And you say, listen, it didn't really happen like that. Yes, it did. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. You weren't even there. You have attacked his reality. He knows what he saw. And he's 100% right. You were not there. You did not see it. He saw a man cut a woman in half, and she was still able to wiggle her feet. That's what he saw. That's what he knows. That is his perception. Now that is his reality. And how dare you try to attack it when you were not even there and you didn't see it? That's it. That's his impression of you, right? And if you keep on pushing, he's going to escalate, his defense on you, against you, all right? So to further prove his point, he tells you after the man cut her in half, and she wiggled her feet, he took the half of the box with the feet in it and moved it over here to stage right. And the half with the head, he put it over there on stage left. And then he walked over there and talked to the woman's head. And she spoke back to him. And then he brought the two halves back together and did some abracadabra incantation over the box and then opened the lid. And the woman climbed out. She was full form, no blood. He cut her in half. He put her back together. And you say, listen, it's an illusion. No, it's not. He's going to go off on you again because you were not there. He knows what he saw. The man did exactly as he told you. She was cut in half. Her feet were there. Her head was here. He put her back together and there was no blood. So rather than attack this reality and have his temperature go off the charts and attack you, because, this escalation will eventually lead to violence. All right. So you want to, keep the temperature down. So rather than attack his reality, offer him a better perception. As an adult, there's no way this man could have cut a woman in half, separated her body, and put it back together all in the space of a minute. and have her full form. So you say to him, listen, I hear what you're saying. I understand exactly what you're saying. But do you think that maybe, just maybe, perhaps it's possible that the woman he chose out of the audience, maybe she works for him. Maybe she knows the trick. And she travels all over the country with him and sits in the same theater seat wherever they go. That way he can scan the audience and go right to her and bring her up on stage. And when she climbs inside the box, there's already a pair of mannequin dummy legs laying on the floor of the box that are wearing the same stockings and same high heels that she has on. She picks them up by the end, by the little handle on the end, and shoves them out the hole. And she brings her own knees up under her chest. So her whole body is on that side of the box. When he cuts the box in half, the saw never touches her. When he says, wiggle your feet, she just grabs the handles on those poles, legs, and shakes them, and the feet wiggle outside the hole. But now, when he separates the two halves of the box, those feet can no longer move. So he has to deceive you. He has to manipulate you and draw your attention away from those feet. So he walks over here to where the head is. And of course, you're going to follow him, your eyes. So he talks to the lady's head. Of course, she's going to talk back. Her whole body is in that box. He doesn't want you seeing those feet that can no longer move. So then he brings the two halves back together. He does his little abracadabra, and he opens the box. The lady simply pulls those mannequin legs out of the hole, leaves the legs on the floor of the box, and she climbs out, and voila. And then your brother says, that might be the only way that could work. You've offered him a better perception, and he has come to the conclusion that that is the way that trick worked. So manipulation, deceit, good, bad, evil, not, whatever, fun, all that comes into play in that example. But at least you've given somebody a chance to think outside the box, no pun intended, right? Open their blinders and see things a little differently. So maybe that will apply as they get older and they view somebody from the LGBTQ community, or somebody who is trans, or this, that, or the other, or an undocumented immigrant. Maybe I need to open my eyes a little bit wider. Maybe that's not the way it happened, and look at other perceptions.
Could I jump in here? So I did a little watching. I watched the documentary about you, Daryl, and read some of the interviews, and I noticed that it seemed like part of your skill is something that I would think could have been used with this example too, a skill of listening and letting the other person talk. And I was wondering in this case, if saying to the kid, well, tell me your thoughts about it. How do you think it might have happened? Would be an approach to take as well. Because I agree to jump in and say, no, that's not it.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to shut them down. And I noticed that seemed to be something you were doing, was you weren't doing as much talking as you were listening in your conversations with members of the KKK.
Exactly. Well, with older people, of course, they have more experience, more knowledge. They can think a little more outside the box, and come up with some ideas of maybe how this could have happened, that this woman was in the box and the saw went through it and she didn't get hurt. But to an 8-year-old or 7-year-old, they don't have enough experience, lived experience to know that she probably folded herself up, or she was a contortionist or whatever and fit on that side of the box. So all they know is this man cut the woman in half, and voila, and he separated her, and now she's back together. Just like, they believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, because that's what they know.
Just to jump in on this, and Daryl, these are great examples, and I'm so glad that had the opportunity to hear some of these. In our work, I think this listening is actually something that we're working on. We have a study in the field right now, and we're going to have results back in a couple of weeks, where we're trying to kind of understand the importance of listening in these conversations. My view, which is currently not actually based in data, we haven't kind of isolated the importance of listening in our work yet, but we'll have more data on that soon. So right now, it's just my hunch, is that it is very important. And psychologically, and again, we'll have more data on this soon, our hunch is that it can help for kind of two reasons. One is that when people feel listened to, there's kind of some reciprocity that occurs of, well, you're listening to me, so that kind of means that I should listen back to you. And I think the other, actually, maybe there's kind of three things going on. The second is a kind of just defensiveness that gets lowered, and I guess it's kind of related to the first. Okay, if you're not kind of attacking my view head on, and you're telling me a story, and you're listening to what I have to say, I think all those ingredients kind of can reduce the automatic mental response that we often have to say, I don't want someone else to persuade me. I don't want to feel like I can be controlled by other people. It's like, okay, well, kind of lowers the temperature and lowers those kind of ego protective kind of processes. The third, which is I think the most speculative, is that I think this kind of listening might also help people think kind of more about the conversation, especially in the context that I work in, knocking on somebody's door. It's not as though they're forced to have the conversation, but when you ask people questions and you ask them to get engaged, I think they just get more engaged mentally. They're not just physically there, but you get them mentally there more when it's a genuine two-way conversation. And I think some of the other psychology research suggests that could be part of what leads the effects to last, is that you get that kind of mental engagement from folks. At the same time, I think what I do want to stress about it is that on the one hand, these canvassers go through a training, right? It's probably like an hour and a half training before they go out and talk to voters for a day. On the other hand, just like the stories are genuine, I mean, the listening is genuine too. And one indicator of that is we did a study looking at data from a bunch of our studies where we asked the canvassers themselves some questions about what they think of the people who disagree with them, and we actually found a kind of similar change in the canvassers as we found in the canvassed people they canvassed, which is that as you might imagine, the kinds of people who sign up to implement door-to-door canvassing about reducing prejudice towards undocumented immigrants or transgender people, on average, don't start with particularly positive views of people who disagree with them on that issue, or Trump voters or conservatives or whatever. We have different categories we measured, and they start off with quite negative views towards them. But actually, going and having these conversations with people, with the people they disagree with on this issue, we find it leads to a change in their own views and their own judgments, where they express more positive views of the folks who disagree with them on these issues, or conservatives or Trump voters, or with different categories, after implementing these conversations. And so, there's a few reasons why that might be, but I kind of take that as just kind of broadly one more kind of example of what I see as these conversations, being not only it's genuine storytelling, it's genuine listening, and on a hallmark of it being genuine listening is it kind of ends up working in reverse too, and getting the canvassers to change how they feel about the folks they're speaking with.
Terrific. So can I ask, with the examples we have so far, we've had a lot of examples of persuasive storytelling and persuasive listening that are not manipulative or not problematically manipulative. I was wondering if you'd be willing, the three of you would be willing to explore, like, what is an adjustment you could make to your story that would put it sort of over the line? So for example, David, like, what is an element, say we got the people behind the advertisement that Marcia gave. We got the marketing people in, and we brought them in with into your canvasser training. And we said, stories got to be true. We can't have the canvassers telling false stories, but let's bring in some marketing, well-honed marketing tricks, and amp the power of the stories that way. Or Daryl, with your first story, if there was, someone reached out to you and then you got a psychologist on the line, and the psychologist, said, "Oh, you've got a good story, Daryl. That's going to be effective. But like, here's a couple tweaks. Phrase things this way." I mean, is there a version of that that would cross a line for you, even if it wasn't crossing a line into
Yes,
deceptiveness?
yes, and I've had that happen. You know, I've been to many, and I still go to KKK rallies. I've been there when they've set the cross on fire and all that kind of stuff, and you know, bunch of nonsense to me. But I've had a well-known TV network contact me and want to do a story. And they do that all the time. But this particular one, which I won't name, contacted me and wanted to do a story on me and my work with the KKK, and wanted to know if I could set it up so they could interview some Klan, you know, members. I said, yeah, I can do that. And so I spoke to some people, and they said, yeah, they would do it. You know, we have a relationship and all that kind of stuff. And then the network wanted me to set up a cross lighting and have them do this and have them do that. I said, no, that's not real. You know, what I do is real. This is not reality TV where everything is scripted and you know, rehearsed or whatever. What I do is real, because you know, a lot of times people will have pictures of me at a cross lighting, at a Klan rally and stuff like that, and they'll email me and say, you know, we need this for our story. Can you send me, you know, that photo in high res? No, I don't have it in high res. I was just there. Somebody took a picture with their cell phone. You know, none of these pictures are posed per se. You know, in a studio. This is the real thing. If it's grainy, it's grainy. If it's good, then it's good. So, you know, I don't, you know, I understand Hollywood, and yes, you know, if you're going to make a movie, sometimes, you know, you have a little artistic liberty or artistic freedom to Hollywood it up a little bit, you know, and make it a little more dramatic. So your box office receipts are dramatic and things like that. But you know, which becomes what's known as historical fiction, something like that. I get that, and that's fine. But if you're making a documentary or you're telling a news story, then tell it as it is, you know, without flipping the script.
It's not a magic show.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I'd be curious if there are others folks on this. You know, I think, you know, there's these bright lines we can draw when it comes to, you know, stories that are, you know, false or not, right? And I think that's an easy bright line to draw. I think you know, I'm not a philosopher, and so, you know, this is, you know, I was tapped against an invitation to kind of think about some of these issues that, you know, I haven't thought about as much as I have before, maybe as I should. You know, I think some of the lines that I do feel like are, you know, as I see them, like a little more difficult to draw, is when it comes to, for example, stories that are true but, you know, really unrepresentative, right? So, you know, it's, you know, like, imagine, right, someone going door to door trying to sell like lottery tickets or something, and you could say, okay, you know, you've got a 1 in a billion chance of winning, but let me tell you about someone who did win, right? And paint a picture of that for you, and, you know, how exciting that would be. But really, you know, that's exceedingly unlikely. You know, I think, you know, unfortunately, the stories that we, you know, have told of, you know, undocumented immigrants and transgender people, you know, et cetera, experiencing discrimination at doors, I don't think are unusual, or, you know, meaningfully unrepresentative of, you know, the experiences that they face. But, you know, I do think one could imagine contexts where you could tell stories that are true but misleading in the sense that they are, you know, highly unrepresentative of what really occurs. And so you know, that's one example where, you know, I think how to draw that line is a little tricky.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. So good. Deceptiveness, some sort of line. Representativeness, maybe also a difficult line in certain ways, but at least a factor.
Yeah.
Marcia, do you want to weigh in? We're getting sort of into your territory
I think that's a really good point. And if I would also just want to throw in one other thing, kind of in reply to your question of what tweaks would put something over the top. And I already said this, but I want to make a little bit more vivid. So if, as I think probably was the case in the story, Tevye didn't really need to deceive his wife, then that completely changes it from a case where he did need to deceive her in order to prevent it turning out that their daughter gets forced into a marriage she doesn't want to make. And the thing I want to add here is that it's not just the act of manipulating that's the issue. It's also that people can come to really enjoy manipulating people. And so I've actually been especially interested in the kind of character trait of being manipulative, and not just the one-off cases, but the character trait and also kind of practice of getting what you want through manipulating, and just not even bothering to try to have a conversation where you're respecting the person as a thinking person. So I think to just skip that and go straight for what buttons can I push to get them to do this thing that will be best is a problem, even when the goal is a very, very valuable one. So too often I think work on manipulation has just looked at the cases where it's objectionable because the goal itself is just self-serving. I think even when the goal is a great one, people shouldn't be so quick to resort to that kind of technique if they could talk with somebody about it instead. And now back to what you gave us your initial example, Daryl. I don't think of that as manipulative at all, not only because it was important to keep the person from killing themselves, but you were bringing up something true and not in any way a trivial consideration, right? And that was that if he goes to prison, he's not going to get, oh, sorry, it wasn't killing himself, killing somebody else, sorry.
Right.
He wasn't going to get to see his daughters. So I don't see anything the slightest bit objectionable in bringing that up. It would be a different matter if you were just making up the business about not getting to see the daughters. And in fact, if you had every reason to think that the prison they would go to was going to be within an hour of their daughters, that would change it.
The other, dimension of this, is that, I thought about some in as we've, been doing our work is, that I think our work might actually speak to a little bit is, the question of, whether or not the person being persuaded is sort of aware of what you're trying to do, right? And I would say in the canvassing conversations that we've studied, it's really no mystery. I don't know if literally the words like "I am here to try to convince you of X" are said, but someone shows up to your door, they say, on a 0 to 10 scale, like, I'm here to talk to you about this issue. On a 0 to 10 scale, where are you? Oh, you're a 0. Well, I'm a 10. Let me talk to you about like why I'm a 10. Like, I think it's pretty clear. Like, I'm here because like we disagree on this, and I want to like talk to you about like why I have this view, right? So I don't think like, although like are the exact words said like I'm trying to make you a 10 as well. Like I think it's like overwhelmingly clear. Like, I'm not just like your next door neighbor, like interested in what you think. Like I'm here because like I think you should have a different view. One of the things, and at the end, they would ask them, okay, well, our conversation, the story I told, has this changed your view at all? Like, if so, why? And so I think it is pretty clear. What I would say is, one could imagine, examples that are, where there's more like misdirection involved, right? And it's less clear. It's as if like all right, let's just I don't know how I think about this issue either, right? Like let's sit down and do some research together, and let's pull up some resources, and oh wow, like everything that we're finding online, or all the stories we're finding, all cut in one direction. How interesting! This is not staged at all, right? What I would say is that one thing in our work that I think speaks to this is that I think sometimes when there's a I think that the world of pop psychology has done a disservice to our understanding of how manipulable people are. I would say, one theme of my read of the research on persuasion is that the effects tend to be, on average, quite small. Now, for some subset of people, right, the small effect is driven by most people not changing at all, and not typically, some people changing meaningfully. So for some subset, it is real. But I think the other thing I would say in our work is that something that we just see again and again is that, people have this whole, network of beliefs and attitudes, and when you change one, Most people are not philosophers, and they're not saying, okay, well, if I change this one thing that we talked about, I'm going to then think through the implications for everything else I believe. No, it's like what we find is that the persuasion that we do find tends to be very narrow on like kind of the exact thing or the exact group we talked about, that's kind of explicitly talked about. And I think that's the piece I wanted to bring up here, is that, you might think, for example, that, having a conversation with someone about why a certain group shouldn't be treated differently might like somehow change them to say, oh, I've reached this insight that like treating every group differently is bad. But like, no, that's not how it works. It's like that group, and often more specifically, like in that specific circumstance that we talked about, and where it was explicit, like that thing I've now come to realize like is wrong. But that doesn't mean that you've sort of, transformed my mind such that, bring me a new group that we didn't talk about and I'm going to like feel the same way. And I do think that's important just empirically, because it speaks to, from my point of view, the idea of like the practicability of trying to, persuade people through kind of misdirection or not telling them what you're trying to do. Like, I just think if that kind of Jedi mind tricks like could work, where like we don't even talk about a specific topic, and so you're not aware that I'm trying to persuade you of it, and yet somehow I set off a kind of multi-step process that leads you to have some view that you didn't realize that I know I was trying to change. I just think that that's, while possible, like it's going to be exceedingly rare and unlikely. That I think it's to summarize, I think it's just it's very hard, I think, empirically to change people's minds without having them realize that that is what you're doing. I think it's clearly possible, but I just think what we've seen in our work is that it's without it being clear that like what we're trying to get you to do is to agree with this thing. It's people like don't necessarily connect the dots to be like, oh, like I'm going to think about if I'm going to change my view on that thing.
To dovetail on David's comment, I'm smiling because I know exactly what he's talking about. I've had that happen with me, and then I put in some safeguards later on to make sure that it doesn't continue to happen. Like, for example, I deal with these KKK people, for example, right? And some of them come to accept me. But, early on when I was doing it, decades ago and stuff, not now, I do things a little bit differently when I approach them. I began to realize that they liked me, not Black people, me. But Daryl Davis, he's okay for a Black guy. It's those other Black people, the ones that they don't know. So yes, that persuasion, that change can be very laser focused, narrow, and that's not what I want. I don't want them to like me. I want them to like other people, maybe who look like me and who maybe have the same interests, etc. Are there bad Black people? Of course, just like they're bad anybody in any color. But they see you and think, okay, well, Daryl is the exception. So now what I do, and I've been doing it for a long time now, but I'm just talking about what happened in the beginning. Once I feel I can trust these people enough that they won't hurt my friends or whatever, because sometimes I bring them over to my house and they sit right here in my living room and we have conversations. When I feel safe enough that they're not going to bring any harm. I'm not so much worried about me, but other people who I bring in to their environment. Once I feel that they're safe, I will invite some of my other Black friends, some of my Jewish friends over to my house to meet them, and so that they can converse. And they get to see, not because I tell them Jewish people are okay, or other Black people are okay, or Muslim people are okay, or whatever. I want them to come to that conclusion on their own. So first they accept me. And my first thought was, oh, okay, so now he's good, and now Black people are good. No, I learned, no, it was me who was good. So I have to expand that worldview, so to speak. And so then as I bring them on and they get to meet Jewish people and other Black people, etc., then their view begins to expand and not just be so laser focused on me. One thing that happened, oh gosh, probably 9-10 years ago, I had played somewhere up in Pennsylvania, and I was coming back down the highway, And I stopped at this bar that said, live music. And it was a bluegrass bar. And I used to play bluegrass a long time ago. But anyway, I stopped in there. And as soon as I walked in, everybody like froze, and everybody's looking at me. I'm the only Black guy in the place. And now the musicians recognize me because I know a lot of the musicians in the area. And I've played with some of them. Oh, hey, Daryl, how you doing? And then everybody calmed down. And then, they took a break. And then on the next set, they asked me to sit in. So I sat in and played a little bit with them. And then I go back to my seat. And this guy comes over and he says to me, you're Daryl Davis. And I said, yeah. He goes, so you know Donnie, right? And I assumed he meant Donnie, this Klansman who was the Grand Dragon at the time. And Donnie and I became friends. And now Donnie is out and I own Donnie's Robin Hood. And I said, yeah, I know Donnie. He goes, well, Donnie was my best friend. That's why I joined, and you helped Donnie get out and I'm out too. So, it's like a follower, he followed his friend in, his friend got out, he got out. And he was very happy. He goes, man, I see a lot more now and da, da, da. He was very grateful to me that through Donnie, he got out, right? He's shaking my hand and stuff. And he said, it's not the Black people we have to worry about in this country. It's the Hispanics. And he used a racial epithet for the Hispanics. So I got him clear on one group of people. Now I've got to work on getting him clear on the others, So that's why I was smiling when you were talking there, David.
Yeah, and just to jump in briefly, I mean, yeah, so it's a lot of what you're saying resonates so much with what we find for sure. One thing on this I'll say briefly, so we have this, we have a few studies in progress. I mentioned we have this project on trying to understand, just how important listening it is. I suspect it isn't. Well, so we see this other project on, where we kind of catalog the stories. The reason we did that is that we basically made a bunch of more like TV ads, like one-way ads that try to encapsulate the different stories and try to understand what kind of stories is it that's most effective. And I think one of the interesting contrast we find is that we basically take a few different stories where we tell a story of a group member experiencing discrimination. I mentioned earlier that in our preliminary findings, those stories seem to be the most effective, and a lot of those discrimination stories seem to that they involve some kind of negative consequence, some kind of suffering is created for the person who experiences the discrimination. And so we also have versions, and these are just these kind of little small psychology experiments we're doing. When we recut the ads to basically remove the part about the discrimination happening and just tell so basically the video is just a subset of the content of the other, and it just talks about a member of that group suffering, and that is way less effective. And why is that? Why is it that suffering happening because they're discriminated against a member of that group seems to be important? I suspect one reason, and I'm giving more speculation of results that we'll have soon. I suspect one reason might be that, to what you said, Daryl, if someone is just a member of a group who suffers, you might feel bad for that person, but you're not going to kind of generalize out to the group, right? Whereas if I tell you, here's an example of someone facing discrimination because they're a member of this group, and their boss said this slur to them or whatever else. Now all of a sudden it's it's not just about that person. If that happened to this person, right, this could happen to any member of that group, because there's these people walking around that whenever they see a member of this group, that's their reaction. And so I one person to the whole group is really important. And I think that could be one reason why we kind of see this pattern of results about why discrimination as something that members of the group generically face might be so important.
Yeah, and that reminds me of that quote by the German theologian Hermann Niemöller, who said, first they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak up, and then they came for so and so,
yep.
And then there was nobody left to speak up because we discriminate against anybody who doesn't look like us or believe as we do. I had this exalted cyclops, which means a district leader in Klan terminology, in my car, and we were driving somewhere, and we got on the topic of black on black crime, and I'm here in the DC area in Silver Spring, Maryland, right over the line, and he was talking about that Black people are inherently criminal. Because that's what he's taught, and that's what's reinforced in his echo chamber in the Klan. And that he said that I'm driving, he's sitting over here in the passenger seat. He said that all Black people are born with a gene that makes them violent. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, who's doing all the carjackings and drive-bys in Southeast? He was referring to Southeast Washington, D.C., which is predominantly Black. This is whites that live there, but it's predominantly Black and very high crime ridden. I said, okay, it's Black people. I said, but that's what lives there. You're not considering the demographics. Who's doing all the crime in Bangor, Maine? White people, because that's what lives up there, right? So he says, no, that has nothing to do with it. You all have this gene in you. I looked at him and I said, look, man, I'm as Black as anybody you've ever seen. I have never done a carjacking or a drive-by. How do you explain that? He did not pause 1 second to think about it. He answered me like that. He said, your gene is latent. It hasn't come out yet. I was dumbfounded. I was speechless. How do you even argue that? I'm just driving like a deer with his eyes in the headlight, and he's over here all smug. You see, you got nothing to say. And I had to think about that. No amount of scientific knowledge, whatever, is going to persuade him. He knows what he knows. That's his reality. So I realized I had to give him another perception. I had to go to where he is, meet him where he's at, right? And I thought about it for a moment. I said, well, all white people have a gene within them that makes them a serial killer. And he said, well, how do you figure that? I said, name me 3 Black serial killers. He couldn't name one. I said, here, I'm going to give you one. I'm going to name one for you. Just give me 2. He couldn't do it. I said, Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer, Henry Lee Lucas, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, David Berkowitz, Son of Sam, Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, on and on and on. I said, son, you are a serial killer. He goes, Daryl, I've never killed anybody. I said, your gene is latent, hasn't come out yet. He goes, well, that's stupid. I said, well, duh. I said, yeah, it is stupid. But it's no more stupid for me to say that about you than what you said about me. And he got very, very quiet. I could tell his wheels were like spinning around, right? And then a moment later, he changed the subject. But within 5 months, he quit the Ku Klux Klan based on that stupid conversation. And today I own his Robin Hood. In fact, that was the first Robin Hood I got. It's a stupid analogy, but it set the tone and gave him another perception to where, whatever happened, it changed his mind. I could give him scientific evidence that he and I have 99.9% of the DNA. That would not have persuaded him.
That's a great story, but I was wondering if you thought of just saying to him, how come you're willing to be alone in a car with me? When do you think this latent gene is going to suddenly appear? I mean, if it's ever going to appear, wouldn't it be more likely to appear against a KKK member?
Well, it almost came out when he said that, the gene.
Well, I'm glad you did it the way you did it. That was brilliant.
But,
like serial killers.
Well,
Yeah.
I've ridden around with lots of Klan people in my car. That's where we do a lot of talking and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember I was taking one of them to Baltimore with me. And I decided to go right through the I-95 tunnel. And as soon as I got up to it, he says, hey, where are you going? Where are you going? I said, well, we have to go under the harbor. He goes, oh, I can't. I didn't know he had a phobia of tunnels. I said, well, I'm sorry, but it's too late. I can't back up here on 95. This is the only thing. He goes, oh man, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, he literally went into a panic. And I said, well, just close your eyes. And he was the Klan leader from Maryland at the time. And just close your eyes, we'll be out in a minute. He like squinted and, braced himself. And we go into the tunnel and I see his eyes are closed. So I started driving real slow. And he goes, how much longer? How much longer? Oh, just a few, a minute or so. I just keep on slowing down, let him feel that. And he said, and so then we get out. I said, open your eyes. He's all happy, he calms down. And I said, man, what were you so afraid of? He said, well, what would happen if the thing broke and water came in and we drowned? I said, what would happen? Tomorrow morning's Baltimore Sun newspaper would say, Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan dies in car with black man. And he goes, Daryl, that's not funny. I was laughing my head off. But I mean, it was mean of me to do that, yes. But I enjoyed it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good note to wrap things up on. I think not just because we brought out the power of stories, but also because we brought out the power of stories, not just to persuade, but also to sort of connect us, to relieve tension. Like there's all these other things that stories do that help us sort of be human and build relationships. So I thank the three of you so much for being part of this, for sharing your stories, for sharing your insights. It's really been an honor. And I'd like to thank you all for the incredible work that you're doing. Persuasion is needed. Persuasion is very hard, but it's encouraging that there are dedicated, intelligent, talented people working at it. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
For organizing it.
My pleasure.